Hey everyone, welcome to another free live Q&A in All Things Academy, which is a space that we've kept for our dietitian, nutrition practitioners to chat through lots of different concepts. Today we're going to run through, I did a little thing. We're going to run through running, nutrition, and also just how to work with runners within your clientele or support them in a way that makes sense and logistically and practically makes sense for them as well. We'll cover a little snippet today. There's a bigger module and piece to running nutrition being developed as we speak to release over the coming months. However, today we are going to cover a little bit that mainly works around like the training environment, optimizing nutrition in that, and also preparation into competition. Obviously, with running nutrition, there's lots of different distances. So we'll be like, for the 20 to 25 minutes we have together before question time, and we will be taking it a little bit generalized at times. So if you have specific questions you'd like to shoot through, please do so. That is completely fine. And if we can't get through them all, we'll shoot them through to your registration email to go through them at a later date. So for those who I haven't met, my name's Alicia. I'm an advanced sports dietitian. I founded alongside my hubby Compeat Performance about 7 years ago now. And as an offshoot for that, we realized there was a really big gap in the way that dietitians were practicing. And we really wanted to create a cohort of individuals that felt more connected, felt more empowered, but also had more of a behavior change lens. So we created the Academy a couple of years ago now, which Kirsten now leads. And that's been one of our best decisions yet in terms of both people behind Academy, but also such a great business idea now that has I just love the connection. I love the communication and the conversations that happen. So welcome everyone. If you're not already Academy member, please reach out and we can send you through some info, but I can see lots of familiar names on here on our call today. So when we're going through today, I guess the first thing that we'll go through quite logically is before run and what we're looking for there in terms of training, nutrition, and also just preparation into competition. I think for most clients, you'll generally find that they're doing morning runs, and that's more of a cultural piece for running, but also often the age people are getting into running, they are juggling it with work and family life a lot of the time. So some of the pre-nutrition suggestions I'll have are very morning focused, but also just considerations in the afternoon as well are really important. So it's really important, I guess, with the run nutrition, particularly in the training piece, is to like try and practice what you can and get someone used to having something before a run if possible, if performance is the goal. And also for dependent of like the duration of that run, the intensity they're looking to achieve and the quality they want to get out of it as well. The longer the run is going for, the more quality they want out of that run, whether that's their coach or them, the more important it is to fuel it. If it's a lower intensity, shorter run, you can get away with it performance-wise, having it fasted, and it's not necessarily a massive detriment. And there can be certain times in a program or a season where you can do low carbohydrate availability running or recovery to drive that adaptation. So there's definitely some things you can play with depending on who you're having that conversation with, who you're working alongside, and how mature, I guess, they are in their running history. And the more mature they are and like the more in depth, I guess, they've been running and have that curiosity about learning nutrition, the more fun you can play with in terms of the science. However, having said that, it's also a population, particularly endurance, that do have a sensitivity to weight. And sometimes we do find that they do have a higher risk of things like disordered eating or body image challenges. And I can't stress to you enough how important it is to screen for those things from the get-go to ensure that you're considering those as the top priority to enable the performance, to enable that really fun science stuff. You can't really do one without the other. And sometimes you'll find that you are frustrated you can't do all that fun science stuff, because you're spending so much time on the groundwork, and that is completely okay. It's still really valid because do you know what we do have really strong evidence for? It's for a really strong relationship with food and adequate fueling, and ensuring that also equals adequate timing and things as well. So before a session, working backwards is important just to enable them to reach that run at a place where they're not overfull, not hungry, and also comfortable and accessing that energy that you're looking to achieve. If they've got a really long run planned for the morning, or an early morning often, you want to pay more attention to that nutrition on the day before and kind of treat that like their pre-run nutrition planning and timeline, so that they're arriving at their run and really important training run a lot of the time in a state which has plenty of glycogen available, hydration is on point. So they're not playing too much catch up by the time they wake up and have to run, because it's a really short window a lot of the time, where often you've only got, say, 45, 30 minutes before they go from the point they get out of bed to the point they're actually running out the door. So that means that you're also quite limited with what carbohydrates and options you can give people. You'll probably be aware, if you've been working with running nutrition for a while, that you'll have a range of clients. Some of them seem to have iron guts, and you can kind of feed them anything in the half hour to an hour beforehand and they won't have an issue. And then you'll have others which seem to be so sensitive even to just a sip of juice or some sports drink. So really arriving at a point of, first of all, understanding who is in front of you and what their history is, and doing a whole lot of listening is really important here. And the reason for that is that you want to meet them where they're at in what they're currently able to achieve or feel confident in achieving, and then build from there. So if someone's really used to not having anything before a run, asking them the questions of like, well, what have you tried before? Why is that? And seeking a bit more clarity, or what has happened when you've eaten in the past, or, do you feel like that's hindering your speed, your stamina, your endurance, those types of things, is gathering information to then come up with a plan. You don't want to just jump in and fix something that's not broken, and you really want to take time to understand the why behind them coming to see you, so you're not kind of getting distracted on things that you're like, and inside they're like, this isn't even why I'm here. Like, why are we focusing on pre-run nutrition if that's not even what I feel is the problem? So just making sure you're not rushing in to kind of prescribe and fix, and spending a whole lot of time and just sitting, even if that's uncomfortably going, oh my God, why are they doing that? Because sometimes you jump in and fix or diss something that they actually really believe in. And you can kind of break that rapport quite early. So pre-run nutrition can be really individual. Obviously, if you've only got, say, half hour to an hour before that run starts, say in that morning session, you're aiming for those simple carbs that are really easy to get into, really fast to digest and easy to access. And making sure that you give yourself permission to scale them depending on what the client can achieve or what they're currently doing. So say you, in your head, you might be like, a banana before your run, perfect. And they're like, oh my God, no way. Feel free to then go, okay, that's totally fine. What about half a banana? And they're like, oh, I could try. And you're like, you're also not sounding very confident. Could we go a quarter of a banana? Or could we go something completely different, like a little glass of orange juice or a little sip of sports drink? You can go really small and then build up from there. And that's completely okay. And just starting to train that gut to, and also appetite and, the aversion they might have to eating beforehand. The other thing to be aware of when you ask those questions about what they're having beforehand is you might get a response that's around, well, why would I do that? It's only a such and such run, or I feel like it'd be a waste to have something. You're then getting into more of the relationship with food and body piece. So just being aware that the reason they might not be eating beforehand isn't always related to not feeling hungry and those types of things. It also might be related to wanting to burn to earn their food, or not feeling like they're running hard enough or doing enough to earn their food. So just being aware of those little things that might come up in those conversations. And that's why those curiosity questions are so important from the start. Obviously, as you get more time before a run, that's when you can start to put more things in. Ideally, before a longer run, particularly those that are over that 60 to 90-minute mark, you're looking for something a little bit more substantial, ideally beforehand. So that might be encouraging them to either run a little bit later, so you've got time to have something a bit bigger, or depending on, their setup, they might go to bed earlier so they can rise a little bit earlier and give themselves time. And when we say a little bit bigger, it doesn't need to be huge things, because ideally they're having enough in the night before, the day before, to just top up. But it might be then adding things that are still really easy to get through an hour before running, and still sit well. But things like up and goes, things like bagels, toast, crumpets, tinned fruit, you can start to have those foods come in and be able to shift into a run quite easily. I guess that does probably lend itself to me mentioning things like gut upset and those types of things. You can absolutely edit the foods that they're having in the 24 to 48 hours before a key run, a training run, or a key event, to ease those symptoms. These will be covered in the modulo. It's like almost a discussion in itself, but absolutely a key part of your role as a dietitian in running nutrition is often managing gut upset, the runner's gut, and those types of things that can really impact someone's feelings around running and confidence around running, and be something that you've got such an asset and value in helping them get through. Once they're running, it's not always a need for them to drink or eat during that run. Sometimes we are trying to push the boundaries of adaptation, and adaptation is brought about by stress. But we want to make sure that that stress is well planned and moderated in that multidisciplinary team, right? So if you've got quite a serious runner who's got the programming and a coach, ideally linking in with that coach and getting a really strong understanding of what's your what's the current training block like, what are you looking to get out of it, and then working alongside them to drive those adaptations and work on achieving that common goal with them. It is such an asset to you as a dietitian to do that, so that you're not kind of recommending one thing to the client, which is actually the opposite of what the coach is looking to get out of that session. So for example, you're like, oh, I noticed that session on Sunday is a 3-hour run. What pace are they looking to do that in? Are you wanting to drive adaptations there? If it's the off season, that might be quite a slow run, and you could probably push the limits a little bit because performance isn't necessarily what they're after. But if that's a 3-hour run 2 weeks out from a key race, it's very unlikely you're going to be doing anything that's adding more stress, and it's going to be all performance focused. So that's where that timing really fits. It's sometimes we're doing the opposite of high performance to drive stress and drive adaptation and speed that up. And sometimes we're doing everything we have and everything in the book to ease the load and aim for that performance recovery, and basically just manage that stress and inflammation from the runner. So you're kind of just pulling tools in a toolbox, if you like, and really making sure you understand all the different training blocks, what they mean to the runner, all the different runs, and what the energy systems are for those will allow you to pull on those science. Even if the client doesn't need to understand all that, you get to play with that and help them achieve their goal. And that will also help you decide what you need to have them having during their run. Because if it's a shorter run or a lower speed run, you can do so without fluid or food. But once it gets over that 45 to 60 minutes mark, that is glycogen limiting, and you want to start to put some carbohydrates in ideally, or at least some fluid that ideally contains some carbohydrates as well. And sometimes you will come up with a little bit of a barrier in giving them permission to do that. Sometimes they might resist, and that's really normal culturally, we find. So just being aware that sometimes that is a bit of a blocker that we can definitely talk about if we have time at the end of this session. But just ensuring that we're trying to get in, similar amounts as what we're building towards for competition, but also encouraging them that the purpose of this run isn't to lose weight, and the purpose of this run is actually for performance, for you to feel really good, and to get the most out of that session, and giving them permission to feel that, do that, and believe that they've earned that can be a really key part of your role in nutrition, where yes, you can prescribe all you like, but if there's a whole lot of challenge, friction, and barrier to them feeling able to do that, then that's what you've got to focus on first, to then enable them to feel able to eat, the gels or the chews or the sports drinks or the real food, whatever suits them the most. So the other piece, I guess, in terms of during is that gut, training the gut is a really important part of that. You'll probably come across a lot, and anyone who's worked with endurance athletes probably has felt about this, whether that's cycling, triathlon, or running, that sometimes they try and train low on nutrition and then try and compete high. And trying to explain that is really important, of like, well, why are we feeling the training rides and runs and all those types of things, but also what does that help us achieve in competition, so that they understand the why behind it. Because sometimes they're just simply not aware of like, well, I'm only training, why would I feel that? But, fueling your runs can help be in so much more control of your appetite by the time you finish. First of all, if that's what they're worried about, it actually helps with that. But also you get a whole lot more out of that run in terms of intensity and quality, better concentration, better focus, lower injury risk, all those types of things, alongside then helping to also train the gut so that we can do the ideal of carbohydrate feeds once we do hit competition. And so there's lots of things that you want to trickle into your education and knowledge and curiosity to allow them to have that during the run. And sometimes that's also working through the logistics of eating enough during a run as well. Running is one of those complexities where the gear is really important. So, not just working out, okay, you're running this far, you need this much, but okay, what are you carrying? What backpack brand have you got? What size is it? How many bidons has it got? How many flasks have you got? What are you hoping to carry in the backpack versus the flasks? And having that knowledge of all the different options and different brands they might be choosing and helping them decide is a really beautiful part of the rapport and communication that you can have with that client, so that they feel like you're enabling what you've prescribed and not just prescribing and going, bye, good luck, have a good time. So yeah, that knowledge around also, the course, the hills, where do they sit, how intense it's going to be, when to feed around those hills or those different courses, depending on what you can reach, is a really important part of your role too. So yes, we can know the signs of like how many grams per hour are we aiming for, but translating that to the actual training event is what makes you an incredible dietitian and why people value us. Because I think in many ways we're less about the science and more about the problem solving. And if someone can get on that start line knowing I've done so many things, I know my plan A, my plan B, my plan C, and I feel really confident that I've done everything I can in the nutrition side to now perform, then that's a really big gift that you can provide. Any questions so far? Awesome. I shall keep going. So then we've got, I guess, the post run, making sure I leave enough time for questions. The post run is a really interesting time. First of all, I find that if someone has restricted over their run, depending on the length of the run, sometimes restriction is actually just something that is unavoidable. There's going to be quite a severe deficit because they simply haven't been able to get through the amount of energy and carbohydrate they have needed for the type of run they've done. So appreciating that is one really important thing. But also there might also have been some intentional restriction, maybe a mental restriction that has then meant that they haven't fueled properly for that run, which can then lead to over the day feeling very out of control around food or having a really low appetite at times too. So really like this push-pull where they've got the mental piece of like, I need to restrict what I need to eat for that recovery to ensure that I then have made that run worth it, if you like, particularly if their psychology around running is for body and weight. You'll find that often comes up. But also sometimes they've had that history where food is fuel. And so if they haven't earned that fuel, it'll feel very hard to, or haven't burnt that fuel, it feels really hard to earn that fuel afterwards. So sometimes recovery comes with a really big barrier to giving them permission to eat enough in the immediate aftermath of that run, but also for the hours after. So when we're talking about running, like obviously with the longer training sessions, it does take some time to recover. So appreciating that recovery and reiterating to them that recovery takes more than, that first half hour to 60 minutes is sometimes a really important conversation to have. And, recovery does take 2 to 3 days. So they've got a 48 to 72 hour window, not just a 30 to 60 minute window. And so if they're really struggling to get something in that first 30 to 60 minutes, it's okay. And easing that burden from them that they might be feeling really bad about that can be really empowering, but also just encouraging them to get something in that first hour can be really nice to do as well, particularly as you'll generally find that runners turn around to the next training session within a day often, or within 12 hours sometimes as well. So just making sure that you're kind of keeping that in mind of like, sometimes I actually really need them to have something within that 60 minutes. And then other times I can actually be a little bit more lenient and relaxed around that recovery because we've got a whole lot more time. So we're aiming for, and that won't be a surprise to you, like the 4 R's where we're looking to refuel with carbohydrates, repair with protein, rehydrate with electrolytes and fluid, but also revitalize with as much color as we can. It's really tricky to do the color bit in the first hour to 2 hours often. They're looking for more comfort foods, salty foods, finger foods, easy to get down foods, and that is completely okay. And you can generally do that with like just you know, you can tick off the protein and carbohydrates and also fluid quite readily doing that. But then reiterating that frequency of feed just to ensure they're getting enough in. So when we're looking at like the protein recovery and rebuild research, it does suggest that we don't need to be so heavy with the frequent feeds to get as much out of that for recovery, and we can space it, you know, to 1 to 2 feeds over the day. The problem is with that is that it's very likely that someone will accidentally underfuel and underdo the protein as well. It's just simply really hard to get enough in if you're only having 1 to 2 meals over the day. So I still find myself looking at frequency because it just allows them to eat enough, particularly if they're low in appetite and whatnot as well. So doing that every 3-ish hours, you generally can meet the protein carbohydrate needs quite readily. And then with fluids, you can do so with water, but also things like smoothies, up and goes, electrolyte drinks, sports drinks, juices, they all add up and can really align to getting enough energy in, but also allowing for that fluid to be absorbed and utilized by the body quite well. So also being realistic, I guess, in that regard is considering maybe the afternoon nighttime runs. So if you've got a client that is doing more afternoon nighttime kind of runs around work or family life, which will generally happen particularly with mums, you want to look at a few things around the nutrition beforehand. And you can lead that in from, like working backwards of going, okay, will you finish work at this time? Or can we have an afternoon tea, which then allows us to have 2 to 3 hours before the run starts, and then just a little top-up snack when you finish work to run in on. So you can kind of just work backwards like you would for any other nutrition planning, but it also allows for a whole lot more opportunity for hydration and just adequacy of carbohydrate. So I do love the afternoon runs for that reason. It's just a whole lot more opportunity. But just keeping in mind, if they are really busy at home or work, the risk of underfueling at lunch and over the day can be something that will then impact energy availability for that afternoon run. So making really clear options that are easy to access, easy to afford, that can be kept in pantry or in their bag can be a really good thing just to play with in terms of logistics and making sure that it feels realistic for their life around all the things they're generally juggling. Because runners, there's not a whole lot of money in running. You won't generally find many professional runners that aren't working. So there's a lot of things to juggle when you're working with runners, particularly as you start to get into the endurance running and ultra endurance running. But half-hour session is not going to cover ultra endurance running. I think that's going to be like a whole chapter in itself when we release the module. So yeah, I'll open up to questions. Kirst, has any come through that you've got there, huh?
Just yet. Oh, actually, yes, we do.
Yeah. Thanks, Alicia. Why canned fruit for pre-run fuel rather than fresh fruit? No, canned fruit, fresh fruit, obviously, like bananas are the goat. Whenever a client says to me they don't like bananas, I'm like, oh God, I've got a mind blank. I don't know anything else. But canned fruit we do usually use because the process of canning them and the cooking allows it to be absorbed a whole lot faster. So they're a higher GI option and sit really well on the gut. So we'll often have either the apple puree pouches are really handy on the run, go. If they're traveling for that run or they're traveling for work or they just need something out of the pantry, I find them really handy. Or obviously the tin peaches and whatnot as well can be really well. It adds fruit, but also it's got the juices with it as well. So it's just a really good hit of carbohydrate. Yeah, good question. So I just got another question. Timing of recovery should be 30 to 60 minutes. Is it different in endurance compared to strength? Yeah, so with the recovery window, Paris, definitely still that 30 to 60 minutes is where we see a window of opportunity with the absorption of protein in particular. And it is very similar across endurance and strength. But it's just that even in strength, recovery window is actually more 2 to 3 days. So if you're working with someone who is exercising most days, they're literally always in a state of recovery. And you can kind of reiterate that of like, eating the adequacy of protein, the color, the carbohydrates is actually always important, but it also can help them ease their mind a little bit of like, okay, you haven't missed the window. Like the window hasn't closed. You're still okay. Because I feel like sometimes in social media land, that window was, especially previously, really shouted at of like, you need to eat within 30 to 60 minutes, otherwise it's a waste. And it's like, well, no, you're still going to do a whole lot of adapting, and there's some really good things. But yeah, the 1 gram per kilo in the recovery meal is great if you can get it in. If you're finding that they've got a really low appetite or low tolerance for food in that time, you can either do it through fluid, which I find often is the case anyway, and cramming things in with like a smoothie based option or a flavored milkshake. Those types of things tend to be better to get down, but also easing that of going, you know what, this is what we're aiming for. What are you currently doing? Okay, if that's, much lower than that, let's just aim for doubling that maybe to start with and seeing how that feels. So even though the science is one thing, just appreciate that the science often in sports nutrition is in a lab, but also with low numbers within those studies as well. So it's a really great guide, but don't feel like you've failed your client if you don't reach, that 1 gram per kilo. Often it's about, hey, I really want to understand what you're doing right now. And if it's an area of opportunity, yes, we're absolutely going to focus on it and move forward. But it may not have to ever reach that amount if that's not what works with a client. Other than reduced performance, delayed recovery, or appetite changes and weight changes, are there any other symptoms you could get clients to reflect on to help them realize they might be underfueled, get them thinking about nutrition differently? Yeah. Okay, so if you've got a suspected underfueled client, which happens a lot in running in triathlon circles and also cycling circles, I feel, reflective questions are really powerful. And it's something you actually want to do with your clients quite regularly, ideally, even if you don't suspect underfueling. So a few really great ones that I'll utilize and we actually screen for quite often are things that start with, have you noticed? Because it's just an invitation rather than are you low in energy? And it's like, oh, I don't know. It's like, have you noticed yourself feeling more fatigued than you would expect for how much you're doing right now? I think most people would expect to feel tired if they're doing, some running for marathon plus work plus family life. But it's like, are you fatigued beyond what you would expect based around how much you're doing right now? And most people are like, actually, I can think about that and reflect back on that of yes or no, because it's that more flat battery feeling. You can also talk around mood as well. So what we'll generally find in underfueling is more of that, like, yeah, you could probably say it's hanger. Often it's the people you live with that will know that you're underfueling before you do. So you can kind of ask, like, have you noticed yourself being more short to like quick to temper or irritable around loved ones lately? And that's a really nice reflective question too. Obviously, you can also ask about libido and sex hormone based things like either menstrual cycle, or for the guys, it's how frequently they're getting morning erections. So if we're seeing a decline in the number of those in the frequency, or the menstrual cycle is lengthening or it has paused for 2 to 3 months, then that's a really positive reflective question to be putting in as well. And then alongside that, it can be related to injury or illness. So have you noticed yourself getting injured more often than usual? Or what you would expect is usual compared to the other people you're training with? Or have you noticed yourself getting sick or more severely ill when you do get sick than what you would consider is normal? So you're looking at all these signs of what we would consider low energy availability. In the running, like acute sense of training and also competition, that's where you're looking for signs of like, do you have trouble concentrating, focusing, decision making, those types of things? But also, do you feel like you're losing speed, intensity, and endurance by at any certain points in your run? So yes, like sometimes people will say, I know when we're talking to athletes, Kirst, we say this often, is like sometimes they'll be like, yeah, my nutrition is absolutely getting the most out of my performance. But then we're like, okay, have you ever suffered cramping or gut upset or concentration issues? They're like, yes, yes, yes. And it's like, well, Wow. There's some things there that we could probably do. So making sure you're asking really pointed questions. I think sometimes in our lingo, we get really used to asking questions that we understand, but don't mean much to our clients. So if you're asking, how have you been, or how are things going, you've got to wonder, how are they going to respond to that, and do they know what you're looking for? Or can you ask more directed questions that are actually going to get the response you need to be able to help them how you need as well? So just reflecting on that, I find I'm still catching myself doing that. But, reaching out with purpose, asking questions with purpose, and being really translative in those questions is really important too.
Alicia, in those circumstances where you are talking about like the screening for low energy availability and talking to athletes about that, I find myself sometimes I'll go and I'll be quite casual in asking and say like, just conversationally asking those questions. But what about, do you find ever that you're then going the opposite and needing to be quite formal in the way that you ask? Like, okay, I think this might be happening. Is it okay if we go through some questions around what might be showing up in our red flags? Do you find that sets the scene sometimes when someone might potentially be more reactive or in denial about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that way of thinking of it, Kirst, because I think there's a real value to having a conversational, safe rapport conversation like at the start, because they're really vulnerable questions. Like, especially asking a guy how often they're having an erection right of a morning. It's like, I think culturally we're still well off having those conversations. I feel like female wise, we've got very good at asking about menstrual cycle, but I still like we're a really long way from being comfortable or getting the guys comfortable about talking about libido and morning erection frequency. So often I'll more state of like, not about them, of like, oh, we've noticed that when people are accidentally under fueling or not quite meeting their energy needs, that this may happen. So just let me know if that comes up for you, or you might notice me asking that question in the future. So you can kind of make it just not about them and just go, this is something just for you to be aware of. I'm not going to talk about it yet with you, but I'm just going to put it up there. And you can also have like more broad questions. Like, for example, if I'm wanting to screen for disordered eating, one of the basic ones that you can even put into conversation of like, how much space does the thought of food in your body take up in your brain each day? Like, how much space does that take up? And if they're answering a lot, or I think about it all the time, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go do an actual like screen for disordered eating disorder. And there's other questions there that might show up for you as well that you have got used to saying, that then lead you to more the like official screening tool to then lead to diagnosis, not diagnosis, I said that so weird, diagnosis, and collaboration with other professionals for diagnosis. So yeah, like I think there's some really important tools in the toolbox to have ready, and make sure we're not just collecting information that's about numbers or science, but actually collecting a whole lot of information about how that person is showing up and who they're showing up as, because that's then going to enable the science anyway.
Thank you. I have one more question if we have a few minutes.
Yeah.
Are there any particular supplements that you think are some big rocks for runners to consider?
Yeah, I think yeah, for supplement wise for runners, it'll depend on how far the distance is. Like you've got, say, your athletics running. I feel like that's a different topic, where you might consider things like the buffers, like beta alanine and also bicarb. You also might consider caffeine, but also carbohydrates are still really important there. So carbohydrate supplements, sports food supplements. As the run gets longer, there's less evidence for the buffers. But there's more evidence for things like nitrates, caffeine, carbohydrates, that you would kind of have as your base, and then you can build from there. Sometimes you'll have a client that's all they're excited about and all they're interested in. So you might even utilize supplements as like your buy-in while you're working on the more important things. But also you might have someone who's taking lots and lots of supplements come to you. And it's really hard to not diss them all from the get-go. So you just need to kind of work through, okay, there's a lot there, but also it's a real waste of money and time. But they actually really believe in that, and I can tell that means a lot to them. it's probably not worthwhile for me to take them all out right now. I'm just going to sit on that while I build rapport and trust in other areas, and then we can cover it. So just trying to work through, okay, when do I speak up? When do I share that information? And is it what they actually need right now and why they came to see me? So just, yeah, that balance with supplements I think is really interesting. Creatine's emerging as something that could be useful for runners as well. There's not a depth of information in terms of creatine for running, but low harm. The only thing to consider would be the increase in water weight that can be associated with it, and whether that's impacting performance. Injury risk is still up in the air. There's not really much evidence to say it increases injury risk or changes performance all that much. So I'd say it's a low risk supplement that's probably worth trialing for a lot in terms of the lean mass side of things. So yeah, that's probably the only other one that could be considered depending on the age of the athlete, but also what kind of racing they're doing. Awesome. Perfect. Well, we've gone over time, not shocked.